done a good job, the environmental community, in making the case. But now we need to look to the solutions and not to go on restating the case over and over again. And some of the people up here, through government action and private companies, they have caused the most damage to the environment and the loss of biodiversity. And if they were the reasons for some of the problems that today confront our planet, they have to be part of the solution. So nature by itself will not solve the problem of climate change and loss of biodiversity. It is cooperative action on the part of the environmental community and the NGOs, governments, and the private sector. It is only through concerted action by all three parties. But one would say, take for example forests. Forest is a wonderful nature-based solution, preservation of forests, because we know of the climate change. We know some 20% of greenhouse gases come from deforestation. And we know that if you spend about $3.6 billion per year over the next 8 years by 2020, we can have deforestation rates in the world, which will cut 6 gigatons of carbon emission in the atmosphere, the largest climate change action anywhere in the world. In fact, the European Union is contemplating just cutting 2 gigatons. And it could be done fairly cheaply. It's a low-cost abatement solution. The UN has estimated if we cut deforestation rate by half by 2030, we will save $3.7 trillion in environmental damages. So the case is made, but why aren't we doing it? And this is where we know many of the solutions. The solutions have been written about over and over again. Mangroves to avoid for adaptation, and saving the forests, and preserving ecosystems, which should all have a use, and biofuels without competing for food. That these would all have a big impact, not only on species, but on climate change itself. But why do we see such a malaise in action, and why have we gone backwards after Copenhagen? These are the solutions and the questions we need to answer. And I think we have to go behind what drives every one of these three groups. If we understand what drives their thinking, then we may be able to fashion solutions that they will implement. Politicians tend to think in political cycles, short-term political cycles. So what is popular and what gets you re-elected would probably be in the forefront of their thinking.
So let me ask you this,
Sure.
because that's a critical point. Why is there this malaise? Why isn't there traction? In Rio, it was a disappointment. In Copenhagen, it was a disappointment. In Durban, it was a disappointment. And civil society is now beginning to emerge at these conferences, trying to influence what happens, and it's very difficult. It doesn't get traction. So
yeah.
What's really going on?
Sure. And this is what I'm hoping that this community can lend maybe some impetus, get some momentum back in the climate change negotiations. It was a breakdown of trust. In spite of every head of state, the United States of America, the European countries, the developed countries of the world, saying that they subscribe to and agree to the findings of the IPCC. They went to Copenhagen and agreed to a suboptimal agreement that would lead to climate catastrophe. And they promised $30 billion in fast-track financing that never materialized. There is a total breakdown of trust between the developing countries and the developed countries. The promises made in Kyoto are not lived up to. And they often the responsibility now for funding and for being practicing responsible climate policy has shifted from the developed world to the developing world. And so there is that breakdown in trust, and that characterized the discussions in Mexico and in Durban, and it led to, although it's touted as progress, suboptimal and a retreat at Rio on many of the things that were promised, things that were considered fair and equitable, like the principle of common but differentiated responsibility for climate action. The entire developed world has moved away from that principle. So this breakdown of trust has led to this, and there is no predictable future in sight that this will change unless we start changing the dynamics on the ground. We need to put pressure on these politicians as well as the business community to change. And how do we do this? This is the solution we should talk about. I have some ideas, but I don't want to take up all the time. So maybe we can return to those, how we can do exactly that.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. I am going to intersect